Going back to 2012, 2013, a lot of activity taking place up and down the 401. As we know, that's the corridor that connects the province right across the country to the Trans-Canada, east to west in the north. So it is a pipeline, it always will be. It's a source of economy for a lot of industry, as well as human trafficking.
There does seem to be a common perception that trafficking starts as a kidnapping scenario, where maybe you're lured into a vehicle or you're taken from somewhere. I don't want to say that that never happens. Certainly that can happen. The majority of what we're seeing here in our community and what we're seeing with the people we're working with is that the trafficking has been relationship based.
Someone generally isn't going to look like someone you would think that they would look like. There are cases where the person looks disheveled and will look really run down and might even be homeless, but for the most part, they don't look like that. They just look like normal people that come in. The perpetrators themselves might even look like they have a lot of money, they're well put together, or they're upstanding members of the community.
I love the Liberty Project because we give people chances when not a lot of people will, you know. So a bit about me. I'm in recovery. I'm 5.5 years sober from, I was an IV drug user, so I lived on the streets. I was homeless. I participated in sex trafficking as well. I have been a victim of domestic violence. And I'm proof, like Victoria and like you, Kim, that social programs they do have an impact on people.
Our work in We Fight has changed so significantly in 17 years since then, as we've realized that's not what we're seeing in our community right now. What we're seeing the most of in our community is domestic sex trafficking of our women and girls born and raised in Windsor, sex trafficked within Windsor.
Three highest traded commodities in the world are guns, drugs, and people. So if we can eliminate the demand, the market would just go right away.
What do you think a lot of people took away from today's event?
The goal for this event was to really act as a spark and to, ignite the conversation that hasn't really been happening in our community or deserves more light to be shed on. So whether that's human trafficking, abuse, addiction, or trauma, we really wanted this to kind of be the beginning and the first step forward for our community to be more aware of what's been happening, and whether it's to be able to help someone in need and to say that these are the different organizations that you can direct them towards, or to even just spot the signals of maybe someone in need and that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Human trafficking, it can look very different for many different people, but commonly it's somebody who is going to treat you very good in the beginning, and they're going to sell you a dream. They're going to use money and they're going to buy you what you want, but they will most likely also bring drugs into play and likely get you addicted to something, and next thing you know, that's when they're going to start asking favors out of you, requesting that you sleep with others, and next thing you know, you can be getting human trafficked.
My name is Victoria Morrison, and I'm a human trafficking survivor, and I was born and raised in Windsor, Ontario. My childhood was pretty typical. I have a brother and a sister, and I come from a middle-class family. I come from a really good, loving family. 15, 16 is when I started to get curious about drugs and alcohol. I thought that it would just be maybe like an occasional thing, and just be using on the weekends pretty much, but it did end up spiraling into addiction in my adult life.
The traffickers kind of start by giving them a little until they're like hooked. Do you know how the trafficker usually like gets them to want to crave these drugs?
Drugs starting to be offered, and once they are, hooked on these drugs and addicted, then they need money. And where are they going to get this money?
Get up in the morning, figure out how you're going to get your fix and what you got to do to get what you need. And how to keep it going all day long. And you'd be up for, sometimes you can be up for 2 days, 3 days or whatever, and then it's like you crash for a day and then get up and do it all over again. It was insanity is what it was. Like, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results.
I think just people don't understand that it is a disease. It's like a compulsion that it's so hard to control. It's almost impossible to control. And I feel like people don't understand that it can really happen to anybody at any time. And, even I've seen people that have never touched a drug in their life and they try it once and they're hooked. So it's not just people who are abused or come from, traumatic childhoods or traumatic backgrounds. It's literally anybody. And I think I'm a good example of that because I come from a very typical normal family, normal childhood, and obviously I was vulnerable to addiction also.
Kind of a keepsake for the end of program. I think all the girls must have one by now. A few girls were making them for everybody, so pretty nice. And it's right there, it's kind of a mantra, I guess, as soon as you walk in the house. Well, it's always different from group to group, but just meeting everybody and hearing their stories, you just realize how different life affects everyone and how everyone has their own route and their own path in life. So you can never predict or have prejudice or judgment against them because you don't know where they're coming from and you don't know where they're going. So they work their program and they get out of it what they put into it.
With the hostess offer scene, I deal with the hostess offer scene. I went through the hostess offer scene in January of 2017, and it's literally saved my life.
It's been a hard go for me, but I've really come to realize that when you are depressed, I've come to realize that when you're depressed, it's not one thing that affects you.
I didn't want to be like this, right? I knew that I was really sick, and it was nice to have that validation, right? To be welcomed into a place where you can share openly, right? And not have shame for any of the things that you do, because at the end of the day, with addiction, you have to start at the root cause, right?
So human trafficking is a very lucrative opportunity for these offenders. I once went to a presentation where I was told that a bag of drugs can be sold once and a gun can be sold once, but a person can be sold countless times throughout the day. And we're seeing that with our offenders, and we're seeing that they're not looking for the stereotypical trafficking victim, if you will. They're not looking only for the young teenager that may be vulnerable, that may be living in a group home. These offenders are opportunistic. So if they encounter a vulnerable person, they're likely to take advantage and exploit that person.
I actually met him because I was staying in the women's shelter, and I had a few mutual friends who knew him and that were also from the shelter, and they ended up staying at his duplex. And then I was invited to live at his duplex, so I took the offer.
So you meet this man and he says, hey, you know, I'll take care of you. I'll buy you all these things. And slowly that person starts making demands of you.
Slowly progressed into him being suspicious, and then being jealous, and then being a little too controlling. And then that's when it kind of led into being abusive.
Before you know it, you're fully immersed in this world, and you're beaten regularly, and you're raped 40 times a day. And people pay for it, but they pay this boyfriend of yours. And throughout the years that go by, you get arrested, okay? And you tell them what's going on. You can't leave your situation. You're scared. But the cops just say, you're a whore. You know, you're doing this to yourself.
I've arrested victims of human trafficking for things that they had done previously and not recognized the situation that they were in currently. I've suspended their driver's license. I've taken away some of their rights. I had them in the cells at our detachment for things that they were involved in that I didn't know then that they weren't voluntarily participating in.
So are you really going to trust the system? Are you going to go to the people that
we put up these walls because we really don't know who we can trust. And, you know, and even once you get out of the business, and, you know, if you are fortunate enough to get into recovery, trust is a major issue. I mean, even going into the rooms of AA or Narcotics Anonymous, it's extremely hard for women like us to let those walls come down.
Because victims of human trafficking often will not come forward on their own. When Windsor Police does make contact with these victims, the first priority is for their physiological and their psychological needs. It's a very unique situation, different from other crimes, where the victim definitely comes first.
It wasn't until I really got down to the nuts and bolts of what I became to understand what human trafficking was, that they would break down in tears. The short conversations that we would have would simply start, I understand the situation that you're in and it's okay.
initially when someone comes in, they might not be holding
their own identification. They don't have any money.
The person with them might be holding it for them, especially if they have travel documents. They're not from this country. Most people trafficked are from here though. The other thing is that their clothing might be inappropriate for weather, especially among minors. So for example, if it's really hot outside, they might be wearing the long sleeve, long pants to cover up marks.
Bruises and
fractures that don't make sense to the story, like you have broken fractures around your eyes, your teeth are punched out, things like that. Some of the most common things we do see among sex trafficking though are things like STDs, frequent UTIs, frequent abortions or infections from abortions, poorly performed abortions, maybe if someone did it that wasn't a physician, products left inside the vaginal canal, infections, things like that. Other things might be the person's not answering questions for themselves.
Oftentimes they're not even allowed to speak.
Especially if there is a story medically or there's a trauma and a loss in the timeline. So if their perpetrator's with them,
speak for them, usually the trafficker.
They're answering the questions that I'm asking them, but there's the story's changing, or the answers I'm getting from the victim seem really scripted. It's a really
So something that we do at Meeting Professionals Against Human Trafficking, we are a small group of Toronto-based volunteers in the meetings and events industry and hospitality industry, and we speak to event planners and hotel professionals about the issue and raising awareness of human trafficking as it relates to the hospitality industry. Over 85% of the victims of sex trafficking identify their trafficker as their boyfriend. So they actually think that they're in a relationship with their trafficker, and meanwhile he's posting ads online for escort services and exploiting these young girls for sex. And unfortunately, hotels are often used to carry out their crimes.
A lot of clients are able to find girls on escort websites and online a lot.
Many of these situations take place in hotels and motels around the city, and they may even move from hotel to motel. So it's very hard to keep track of their movement within the city and within the province, and it is a very transient crime. It's also a very underreported crime.
You said that there were so many times that you thought this could have been interviewed along the way, right? And
yeah,
how do you think it was?
Yeah, I think that the situation wasn't intervened because people either don't want to see the signs of someone being exploited or abused, or if they do, they're scared, to get in the way of the situation because there might be repercussions for them, or they might endanger themselves. But I think if you definitely sense there is a situation, definitely contact the authorities, or I would say try to at least ask questions.
As an industry, the tourism and hospitality industry, like I said, is dragged into the crime of human trafficking. And so that gives us an opportunity to take action. So the first step is being aware, knowing that this is not an issue that is far away, but that it's happening in Windsor. It's happening in all over Ontario and Canada. It's not just a violation of human rights that's far away. It's happening in our own backyards.
With law enforcement, so any tips that they get, for example, there's a lot of activity at this motel during the auto show, and they'll look into all the areas that they know because it's HIPAA compliant. We're not breaking laws.
Well, the clients were actually pretty typical men, usually middle-aged to older men. Yeah, just pretty normal, everyday guys that, that could be like your neighbor or, your postman or the guy working at the grocery store, like just pretty normal guys.
Selling sex is legal in Ontario and sexual services, although purchasing it is not. This was put in place a few years back in hopes that it would protect the sex trade workers so that they did not feel like they had to hide from police. But at the same time, the purchasing of sexual services is not encouraged.
That it's legal to sell sex, but it's not legal to buy sex. Is that correct? Yeah. Right? I wasn't too sure if that had any effect on
I didn't know that because I read an article in London that says they're gonna start releasing the names of the Johns.
Yeah, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, me too.
I'm so excited.
I know.
Someone would do it.
I think that's great. I hope Windsor does that.
Yeah. Well,
From December 6th of last year to December 6th of this year, so many that were charted on, we got 17 victims and 4 minors. So in 1 year, we got quite a few. I know that there was an 18th the other night. We got another one. It took a long time to really get it solidified, but we kept it after the project was done and it's ongoing. So I mean, we use it every day. So it must be working if we got 18 people, right? So I'm really proud of the nurses for keeping up on it, for sure.
Is it in Windsor right now? Do you know if any hospitals here have?
No, no one uses it here. No. I actually don't think that they have any protocol here at all.
Just recently, within the last week, there was an arrest made where a male suspect was arrested for trafficking a female sex trade worker.
I was taken out of town, and at that point I honestly didn't know if I was ever going to make it back home. I didn't know if I was ever going to see my family again, and I was really scared because I thought there was a good chance that I would die at the hands of my abuser.
Victoria, if there was one thing that you could tell your younger self, what would it be?
I would definitely tell her to be more aware of the dangers out there, and to respect myself and respect myself more.
To both Windsor Police and 2 other unnamed police agencies for advocating for me and being a big part of my recovery and my process through the justice system. My abuser is in jail, awaiting trial for over a dozen charges pertaining to what he did to me. They have worked endlessly and tirelessly in order to bring him to justice and pay for the pain he has caused. And I think it's really important for me to speak out about it, and hopefully people who are going through it, I can give them hope, and just let people know there is a way out, and that you can rebuild your life. And so I'm really proud of this.
I think the biggest hindrance would be just a lack of awareness. Like, just thinking that this is an issue that maybe doesn't happen here in North America, or it doesn't happen here in Canada. So I think the biggest challenge has just been bringing awareness to the issue.
The biggest thing I always tell people is that it doesn't need to be a healthcare provider, and it doesn't need to be a cop or whatever. Anyone can report it. Like in Canada, you can call the Crime Stoppers human trafficking line. In the States, you call the hotline. If you see something, say something.
Don't buy sex, for sure. That would be the first start. The Johns, it's demand drives the market. So if people aren't buying, then traffickers wouldn't be in the business.
So the Freedom Walk is our biggest event of the year that brings together all different walks of life from different demographics, cultures, faith groups, communities, all under one roof to learn about human trafficking. And you're going to hear from different perspectives, from survivors, from law enforcement, from politicians, on what they're all doing to fight human trafficking. And the Freedom Walk is a tangible way for people like you and me to be able to get involved and be a part of the solution. So here's an education starting point. I believe firmly that you can't fight something that you're not aware exists. So if you didn't know about human trafficking before showing up here today, you will definitely be leaving here today being educated on the topic, and that's really our purpose of the walk. In coming to something like this, I always say to people, as an individual, sometimes we say like, my voice doesn't make a difference, my vote doesn't count if I vote, like why should I? And the Freedom Walk really is a testament to you showing up here this morning that you do matter. Your voice does matter, your opinion matters, and without you being here at the walk, this would not happen. And so when we all say yes to just doing something, even if it's small, that's where magic happens. That's where change happens. That's where we change the course of history. And without that, it's not possible. And so people here today should leave knowing that they've been a part of something bigger than you and me collectively all together. So I think an event like this for survivors, for victims even that are just coming out of it, this is a really big encouragement for them to know that they're not alone, that there are people out there that are fighting for their freedom, that is fighting to have their voices heard, and that the journey is long. And so feeling that they have a support system on the other side is really, really important. We have survivors here in the room, some of them you're going to hear from this morning, and an event like the Freedom Walk just encourages others to come forward, seek help, know that they can get out, and that there is love and support and help on the other side for them.
I was told, go, Renelle, leave. You can walk out anytime. But just remember, you're going to go back on those streets. You have nobody. I'm the only person in the world that cares about you. Your family doesn't care about you. You don't have any friends. So leave. But I promise you, you won't make it past a year in the streets. And I believed that. I believed everything he said. I believed that he was the only one that could keep me safe. He was the only one that could help me.
This event means a lot because human trafficking is a huge problem within Canada, but it's also something that people aren't talking about. And education and awareness is the key to getting this out, people to understand, and to keep our children safe. So having events like these where the community comes together to learn, to educate themselves, makes a huge difference in the lives of our children. I think every time you share your story and you're able to show people not only that this crime happens, but that survivors are able to reclaim their lives. I feel empowered. I've been contacted by survivors in Canada and across the world who tell me that this is them. They've experienced this, or they've experienced something similar to this, and I think sharing your story, there's a comfort in that for everybody who's a victim or has previously been a victim in their life.
But I did leave. I did leave. I was triggered. A very traumatic experience where I witnessed him brutally assault a young girl right in front of my eyes. Actually, it was a group of people when it happened, and not one single person moved. Not one single person attempted to help that young lady. And at that moment, as afraid as I was of going back on the streets, I was more afraid of him. I knew I was going to be next, sooner rather than later. So I was lucky. I was able to get in touch with my friends from the streets. They let me hide out for a little bit, lay low. So I was free. Not really. Because I still had psychological, emotional, physical trauma that I carried with me. This is best case scenario, because the reality is that most women that go through sex trafficking, there is no happy ending. I knew girls who were found in a motel OD'd, girls who were found in a ditch, beaten to death by their pimp or by a client. That's how this story can end. This is why it is so important that we have services for survivors to help them escape, but also help them rebuild their lives. And it takes a lot. Education, job training, housing, childcare. mental health, physical health, so many, a multitude of services survivors need to be able